now 50,000, let's say, people prescribed it. Those people have a duty almost to go around, tell their friends, tell their family, tell their GP, look, I've tried this now, it's working. Um, Spread the word.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Harmonia Podcast. We are kicking off the specials today by having this very lovely guest, Professor Mike Barnes. Hi, Mike, how are you?
Hello, everybody. Good, thank you very much. Thank you for asking me.
No, thank you so much for coming on here today. But before we actually, I suppose, kick off with the series, I actually just wanted to hand over to you so that you can do a more formal introduction because I know you've got a vast array of experience in the cannabis sector.
Okay. Yeah, well, I'm Mike Barnes. I'm a professor of neurological rehabilitation is the proper title. But basically, I'm a neurologist trained over many years ago now and worked around the country in straightforward neurology. Um, I was working eventually with people with multiple sclerosis and dealing mainly with one of their major disabling symptoms called spasticity, which is a muscle spasm. It occurs not just in MS, but in people with stroke and brain injury, etc. Um, so I was dealing with those people, and they were coming in telling me they were taking cannabis and it was helping various symptoms, particularly the muscle spasm and the pain. So I thought that was interesting. And so I asked everyone coming to the clinic, who was about 60 people with MS at that time, and I was surprised that over half were using cannabis illegally. Of course, this is 20 plus years ago. So I thought, well, there must be something to this medicine because people wouldn't go out and criminalize themselves. Many of these people were severely disabled. They couldn't just walk down the road. They needed wheelchairs and such like. So it was difficult to get illegal cannabis, but they were using it and finding it helpful. So I thought that really must be something to this. That was my first real exposure to cannabis as a medicine.
Thank you so much. But you also mentioned something that's actually really important here. And you mentioned that people, were willing to criminalize themselves. And that's a very interesting point there because I think a lot of times people often think that people who are misusing substances are, let's be honest, just misusing so that they can get a high and have a little bit of fun. But the reality of the situation is that it is actually much more. I suppose much more sad than what people actually realize. A lot of the times, people misuse substances because they are either self medicating for mental health and physical health, as you just explained. And I find it, oh, sorry, yeah, I was just going to say that I find it very upsetting when I hear about people in wheelchairs in particular having to go score. Sorry, score is lingo, having to go pick up drugs illicitly just so that they can manage their well-being. And at the same time, you have the majority of the UK populace mistranslating what a lot of people's experience around substance misuse. And I say misuse because, in the UK, recreational use is illegal, so it would be categorized as substance misuse. But just on that note, with regards to cannabis, because you were very much involved in, I think you actually were involved in issuing the first cannabis prescription in the UK.
Yeah, well, carrying on that journey, after my experience with the multiple sclerosis patients, I was asked to be involved with the development of what turned out to be the first cannabis medicine called Sativex, which was a licensed medicine for spasticity and multiple sclerosis, and still is. So that gave me a little bit of exposure to cannabis as a medicine, if you like, properly. And then I think it was about 2016, I was asked out the blue, really, by a thing called the All Party Parliamentary Group on Drug Policy Reform, a short and snappy title, to write a sort of resume of the efficacy and safety of cannabis, which I did with my daughter, Jenny. Um, and again, I suppose that was reasonably influential in terms of opening again the cannabis debate, which has been going on under the surface and for many years now, as whether it should be legalized or for medical or for recreational, etc. So it opened that debate up again, and there was a lot of discussion about it, which didn't seem to be going anywhere. But then, nearly 2 years later, in 2018, in the spring of 2018, I got again a phone call out of the blue to see if I would help get a prescription of cannabis for a little boy called Alfie Dingley. Alfie is Hannah Deacon's son and Drew Dingley's son, who has a very rare medical condition. The family wouldn't mind me mentioning it. It's called PCDH19, which is exceptionally rare. There's about I think, two boys in this country with it. So it's that rare. I think seven worldwide. So it's incredibly rare in men. It's still rare, but more common in women and girls. Um, he had had several hundreds of seizures, 300 to 400 seizures a week, and nothing was working. So his parents, in desperation, had done a bit of research, found out that cannabis was helpful for some of these children in the States. So they'd moved from where they live in the Midlands in the UK to Holland, where they lived in a caravan park for 6 months, where they could get cannabis legally from a doctor in The Hague. And it began to work over 5 or 6 weeks. They didn't want to live in a caravan park in The Hague. They wanted to come back home and live at home where they were in Kenilworth in the Midlands. So they decided to have a campaign to bring the medicine back legally or get it prescribed here legally. And that was actually turned out to be perhaps one of the most successful campaigns in modern history, frankly, from a government that was very skeptical to changing their mind in about 3 months to open the way to change the law. So it was extraordinarily successful. And I was asked to make that application for the license. It was illegal then, so you needed what's called a Schedule 1 license to prescribe it, which had never been done before. So I made that application to the Home Office with the permission of the Prime Minister, who got involved, Theresa May at the time. So Hannah conducted this very successful campaign. All the press got behind it, the television outlets and such like. So the government basically caved into that media pressure, which was interesting because it was media pressure, not academic. It wasn't evidence based they were interested in. It was what the Daily Mail said they were interested in. Um, they met Theresa May. The Theresa May said, "Yes, we can do this application." I made the application with the Home Office, and in summer 18, Alfie got his license, and we prescribed the first ever cannabis prescription for Alfie. And by then, he's now been seizure free for nearly 5 years, which is extraordinary. From 300 to 400 seizures a week in intensive care every week, 48 times in a year before he had cannabis, to nothing. He's now learning. He's at school. He's motor control. He's better. He can ride a bike. He rides a horse. He texts me. He reads texts. He's a different child. He still has problems. He still has learning disabilities and autism, but he's no seizures, and his life and his family's life is hugely better. So that he got that prescription in summer 18, and then the Home Secretary announced that they were going to change the law. And about 3 months later, the law changed in November 18 to allow doctors on the specialist register, that's hospital specialists basically, to prescribe cannabis. And we've gone from there. Nearly 6 years later, there's now about 50,000 people prescribed, all largely thanks to the law change from little Alfie.
And you know what? That's actually an incredible journey. And Hannah did come on here as well to speak about her journey as well with Elfie. And I think one of the things that you captured brilliantly was the quality of life. And I think this is a factor that a lot of people generally just don't understand. I know for myself, I've got 40 plus symptoms and about 7, 8 diagnoses. Sorry, there's so many I keep forgetting. But anyways, several diagnoses, several symptoms, which left me completely bedbound. And in Alfie's case, it seemed like it didn't just leave him bedbound, but it didn't even offer him any form of how do I explain this? Sorry, I'm drawing a blank now. But I guess what I'm trying to explain is that it doesn't sound like he even had any function, any cognitive functioning to be able to even. Yeah, this is, so it's sad. It's he went through that, and what makes it even sadder is that it wasn't even the science that I suppose forced the hand of Parliament. It was the media. So it wasn't even the fact that here is this child who is having 300 seizures a week, and he's going from several seizures a week to non-existent because of a medication. You would think that the value of somebody's life would be enough to actually explore the legalization of this medication rather than the media pressure. So that actually really disturbs me, but sure, this is the life that we live in.
Yes, no, sadly, you're right. There was a lot of, there still is obviously a lot of evidence base behind cannabis medicine, real world evidence, as it's called, a great deal. I mean, several thousands of studies. We've just done a complete literature review of epilepsy and cannabis. It's 300 references, 150 pages, studies published since 1949. So there's a solid base going back a long time. So it wasn't as though it's something new and something just discovered. I mean, cannabis as a medicine has been around for 5,000 years. The first description was 5,000 years ago when it was described for pain and probably for epilepsy, actually. But all that solid evidence base, real world evidence base, it didn't seem to matter to the politicians at the time. It's what the Daily Mail said that mattered to the politicians at the time, which is a, I understand it, and we have to use that, but it's a rather sad reflection of the state of politics worldwide, really, not just the UK. But in fairness, they did listen. They did listen, and they did change the law. So well done.
Yeah, a win is a win. A win is a win. We're not even going to argue that point because at the end of the day, I have life changing medication for myself. So a win is a win, and so do hundreds of other patients. And I mean, there's something else that you mentioned that is quite interesting as well, which is, this medication has been around for thousands of years. People have been using it for thousands of years to manage various different conditions. And it's, I think for me anyways, this is why it's so important for people to come and speak up about their experience with medical cannabis, people like yourself coming on this podcast to talk to me about medical cannabis and to talk to the audience, because I think the more people start to understand that this is a medication that has been around for many years and that this isn't anything new that is being introduced into the UK, because I generally tend to feel, especially in the UK, that people are like, oh my God, what is that? Oh, this is something so foreign and so evil. And you explain to them, you do realize, look around you, look at the globe, look at Germany, look at America, they're using it. The world hasn't fallen apart. It's not this, we need to really start removing all of the stigma and demonization of people using medical cannabis. And you know what? People using recreational substances also, because at the end of the day, I always say it, that anyone who is misusing is not misusing because they just want to have fun. They're misusing because they just want to feel better. So why okay, I'm gonna go on a crazy rant again, so I'm gonna stop myself now because I can feel it coming on. But yeah, sorry, I just wanted to touch on that point.
Yeah, no, good point.
And then just in with just sorry, continuing on with your I suppose experience with medical cannabis, because you started with, I suppose, Sativex you mentioned, and then moved on to I suppose the Schedule 2 medications now. Did you feel like you faced any scrutiny within the medical community? Because I can imagine, prescribing cannabis full stop would have sent shockwaves across the NHS.
To be honest, it didn't. Strangely, the first I thought it. Well, it's a perfectly decent medicine. It works for this child. I didn't. Honestly, perhaps I'm just naive. I just didn't see it as particularly controversial because we knew it worked. We knew it had a long history. We knew it was safe. I thought, well, okay, that seems fine. And actually, I've not really had a great deal of anti-cannabis criticism on social media or from doctor colleagues. I know some early prescribers now, about 150 doctors prescribing in the country. I know some have. I think I was probably slightly privileged is the wrong word, but I'd not quite retired, but I'd nearly retired. So I didn't really care what people thought anyway. And I'm aware that some of the younger doctors, younger specialists, have had criticism and don't want to prescribe because they've been told by some of their colleagues, don't do that, it's a silly thing to do, you'll ruin your career if you do it. I've had all sorts of horror stories, particularly from the British Paediatric Neurology Association, who have been highly critical of any paediatric colleague who wants to prescribe, even to the extent of taking one of them to the General Medical Council just for prescribing, which is silly. They lost that case, incidentally. So there's been a lot of pressure from some medical groups to some of the doctors. Actually, I haven't had much personal pressure. The only criticism, ironically, the criticism I've got on social media occasionally is actually from cannabis activists who feel that it's a medicine it's a product that should be legalized completely, and making money from it in the commercial sense, like private clinics and private dispensaries, shouldn't happen. People accuse me of making a great deal of money out of it, which I'm sorry to say I wish was true, but sadly isn't. And that's the criticism has come from the cannabis activists who don't think this should be commercialized at all, without realizing that that's an argument, but it's not an argument that stands up at the moment because recreational cannabis is illegal. And the only way to get this medicine to people, sadly, very sadly, is through the private sector. And the private sector needs to be profitable. Otherwise, there isn't a private sector. It needs to be available to the National Health Service. That's what I'm campaigning for. And I'll try and keep going till we get it properly in the National Health Service. Only 5 prescriptions on the NHS so far in 5 years. So no, I was not really expecting criticism, and I really haven't had any much criticism from colleagues, interestingly, but others have.
First of all, thank you so much for being so honest. I appreciate that. And okay, I can already feel my ADHD brain going wild, so I'm going to try and keep it short, stick to the point, and not kind of go off on a tangent. But I mean, I like you. I suppose I'm pretty much the same. I get the criticism from other people who are generally down the other activists, and you're like, really was expecting this from a whole different group of people, but okay, interesting. Because I think so many people have so many personal opinions around how this medication should be used. And because of that, I tend to find this field to be possibly the most emotive field in the healthcare sector. And I'm coming from children and families. Working in care proceedings where parents are in a very vulnerable situation because they're at risk of losing their children, but somehow this seems more emotive. And again, as a patient, I completely understand. I was bedbound, so I understand why people are so attached to this medication. But I think there is a crucial thing that people keep forgetting, and you just, pointed out, is at the end of the day, we need to treat patients, and we need to treat as many patients as we can. And right now, the only way we can do that is privately. So, can we stop all this criticism of each other? Everyone is correct, right? Everybody is correct, but we still need to follow the law of the land. And the law of the land is that we need to ensure that we can only I'm sorry, issue prescriptions privately. It's not about making a profit, it's about actually supporting as many patients as we can. And in the meantime, we consistently advocate for it to be on a prescription. I would love for my prescription to be on an NHS prescription. I could save so much money. But unfortunately, we're not there yet. And we sorry, I'm just ranting here now, aren't I? Okay, sorry, but we're not there yet. So let's try and stop putting each other down and work together so that we can lift each other up. We all, at the end of the day, have the same goal, and that goal is to have this medication accessible to anyone that needs it. Anyone. I don't care if you're a wreck. I don't care if you're psych, if you're pain, if you require this medication and it is safe for you to have this medication, this is what we're advocating for. But right now, all we can do is work with clinics so that we can get to as many patients as possible. And 5 prescriptions on the NHS, wow. Every time I hear that number, I want to cry, but I'm just going to leave it at that because that's a whole new rant. Sorry. Oh God, it's tragic. Okay, so then I suppose I'm just looking at the time. So, in terms of cannabis naive patients, because one of the things that we do try to advocate for here at Avida is bringing on more and more patients who are cannabis naive. Because actually, I recently found out 7 million people on the waiting list at the NHS. That's 7 million people that are, in my, maybe I'm being dramatic, but are suffering because you're not on the waiting list to see a specialist unless you are struggling and conventional methods are failing, which means you need additional support. So, what sort of advice would you give to those patients who probably are exploring a cannabis prescription but very, very reluctant to because of the word cannabis?
Yes, you're right. There's a lot of stigma still. There's many people, well, as you know from figures, it's probably something between 1.4 and 1.8 million people who use cannabis for medical purposes, not recreational. There clearly is an overlap. Um, but how many more people could use it and could benefit who don't want to criminalize themselves? And I understand that as well. Probably at least twice that number. I mean, from most experiences, about 3% of the population in any given country will benefit from cannabis. It's more, might be more. In Jersey, there's about 4% of the population are on cannabis. That's 100,000. We know that for certain. So, that's 3 million plus people in this country who probably would benefit at least from trying it. It's not going to help everybody. It's not right for everybody, but it may help. So, how can we get to those, let's say, 1.5 million people who might benefit who aren't on it at the moment? All we can do is things like this. We can do media. We can do. I've just done a news interview where they were asked about it on GB News. Every little helps. There's still 2/3 of the population, apparently, according to studies, are not even aware it's legal. I find that an extraordinary statistic. But that seems to be the statistic. It's from two separate studies. So what I think we must do is get the word out there, and that's to doctors who can suggest it to patients. So, but many are reluctant to do so. But so more particularly to the community, the lay public. What I'd love to see, which sadly costs a great deal of money, is a sort of general advertising campaign. Do you know that cannabis is legal for medical reasons? The Cannabis Industry Council tried to do that and just couldn't raise the money, but sadly that's going to cost a few hundred thousands of pounds to do a proper awareness campaign. So we keep chipping away, but I think the way to get at those 1.5 million or so is all we can do is raise awareness through podcasts, through the press, through television, through radio, uh, through social media, and it will chip away. We'll get there. But we've got to get to those 1.5 million because there's so many people out there with chronic anxiety or chronic pain or chronic epilepsy who just don't know it's an option. They need to know it's an option and they need to go to their GP and say, "Can I try it, please?" And the GP needs to educate it enough to say, "I don't know much about it, but let's give it a go. I'll refer you to people who do know what they're talking about." So that's the other barrier is people who find out about it, go to their GP, and their GP turns around and says, "That's a lot of nonsense. Don't believe a word of it," which is equally bad. So we need to educate doctors and we need to educate the public. We'll get there. And also, now 50,000, let's say, people prescribed it. Those people have a duty almost to go around, tell their friends, tell their family, tell their GP, look, I've tried this now, it's working. Um, Spread the word. And there will be a point, won't there? I don't know, whatever the number is, 100,000 people who tell, if everyone tells five others, that's 500,000, etc., etc. So every time I'm in a taxi, I tell the taxi driver about it. I'm probably a fairly boring passenger, but at least I can go and tell others. So it's a long up. I didn't think it would take this length of time to get it more widely known, but it is, and we just got to keep going.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a few key points there. Like, I mean, it's disturbing that only 2/3 know. Again, I don't really keep up with statistics. I'm terrible, so I was not aware of that. And to think like a country this large, only 2/3 of the country, sorry, don't know. Sorry, that's I was getting confused. Yeah, the other way around. Yeah, no, it's really bad. It's really, really bad. Especially like we keep banging on about, this is a life changing medication. And again, I wouldn't be so upset if there was only like, I probably still would be, but if there's only a couple of thousand people that can benefit from it, but where you're looking at 3% of a population of a country benefiting from a medication, that is number one much safer than some of the options, because if you think about it, somebody with a chronic illness, they would have to be on several prescriptions. I was juggling 9 prescriptions at one point, and then the side effects of those prescriptions double down on the side effects of my existing symptoms. Like, you're not getting any quality of life. And here you have, cannabis-based medical products that all of a sudden, I'm jumping out of bed, I'm eating again, I can think, I can use my brain. The symptoms are actually being managed, and it's not introducing any newer symptoms. Like, it just really, really upsets me to think that there isn't enough support from the government to actually push this medication for people, because that kind of funding would only have to come from the government. They can't come from anywhere else, really. Where else are we going to get this funding from? And yeah, again, I'm not going to start going on a crazy rant, because I also want to touch on another point, which is the GP barrier. This is, I suppose, one of the biggest issues that we have right now, in my opinion, because the amount of patients that reach out to me about a cannabis prescription, and or even just friends of friends that are aware that I work in the sector and blah 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 blah. And so I spend hours on the phone to them, going over medical cannabis, how it's helped me, blah blah blah, and get them all excited. They go get an appointment and everything, go back to their GP to get the summary of care, and I have no idea what their GP says to them. But all of a sudden, medical cannabis is evil. Don't use it. Don't use cannabis-based prescriptions. And to the point where I end up being demonized, and I'm like, I'm actually trying to help you have a quality of life here. You just told me that you can't get out of bed. Well, this medication can possibly help you do that. Wouldn't you try something? But the trust in people's GP, despite the fact that, let's not forget, when speaking to these patients, they are non-stop complaining about their GP. But at the same time, their GP says, no, don't do this, and they listen. I find that, maybe I'm too neurodivergent to understand that, but as far as I'm concerned, if you are terrible and you've given me advice, I'm not listening to your advice. You're terrible. Why would I listen to you? Like, but people seem to have this unwavering trust in their GP, and it just, yeah.
Rather touching. It's sad. And I understand people want proper medical advice about this, but I think it's so important to train the GPs who are the front line medics and pharmacists as well. We shouldn't forget people do pop into their local pharmacy and they need a sensible opinion as well. So I think that's really important. And there's a study about 4 years ago now that showed that 28% of GPs would be prepared to prescribe cannabis if they're properly trained. That's a lot. We don't need more than 28% where to prescribe. In a big group practice, you only need one person to be the cannabis GP, if you like. Um, and we do need GPs to be able to primary prescribe. At the moment, they can only do follow up prescriptions. But cannabis is a very GP orientated medicine because a lot of people with chronic anxiety, chronic pain, go to their GP and are dealt with in general practice. They don't all get referred to the pain specialist or the psychiatrist. It's only those at the very severe end of the spectrum that get to hospital. And I'm not talking about childhood epilepsy here, but I don't mean it rudely, but the run of the mill, that's a bad phrase, but the run of the mill, slightly lesser pain, slightly lesser anxiety is a GP issue. And therefore the GP should be allowed to prescribe. And I'm really keen on that we should get this change of the law, and only takes a little tweak in the law to allow GPs to prescribe. That's all it will take. It doesn't take a primary law change. It doesn't take parliamentary time. The Home Secretary could make that law change today. Um, so that's what we need to do. I think that's a real key to unlocking some of this is to get GPs knowledgeable and able to prescribe.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's very interesting that you say this, because if you think about it, the number one reason why people visit their GP is for anxiety and depression. And a lot of the times, what you generally tend to find is a lot of people don't want to go on. I suppose, conventional pharmacological medications, because they generally tend to say, and we're talking about psychiatry here, they generally tend to say that yes, they can take the medication, and sometimes it does give them relief, but it also numbs them completely. So they don't really have any sort of like sense of any kind of emotion, whether it's happiness, whether it's sadness, which is fair because that is what a lot of mental health medication is designed to do. If you're at a place where you're feeling way too much emotions, then yes, that's what it's supposed to do. But so, unfortunately, it can be too effective in doing this, and people generally tend to lose their personality as a result. They don't like that. They don't like not being able to feel any emotion, especially parents. They don't like feeling any, not being able to feel any emotions when they're supposed hugging their child. How it's basically the reason why I touched on this point is, in my opinion, again, how can this medication be, I guess, the be all and end all and so effective as, I suppose, people would like us to. Oh, damn it. Sorry. My brain is completely fried. We've been chatting for too long now. The brain fog is kicking in. I suppose what I'm trying to explain is that at the end of the day, GPs would rather prescribe you something like sertraline, that's going to void you of all emotions and potentially help a little bit, instead of considering a cannabis based prescription, because they, yes, you worry about addiction and stuff, but again, like opioids that you prescribe, you put measures in place and that's it really. So those same sort of measures should be applied to a cannabis prescription, and we really, GPs really shouldn't be a massive barrier for patients when they're going in, because again, so many patients with anxiety and depression go in, and if their GP is not even willing to have this discussion with them or refer them to a clinic that can have these discussions with them, it's just going to create so many new problems. No, sorry, it's already creating problems. What am I talking about?
No, you're right. You're right. Yeah, we need people to be educated. They need, I don't want every doctor prescribing it, but I want every doctor who comes face to face with those people with those sort of conditions to at least understand that it may have a role. It's not right for everybody. We've said that. Not going to suit everybody. We've said that, but at least don't dismiss it just out of hand, just without even thinking about and out of ignorance. I don't mind people rejecting it when they know what they're talking about. Not everyone's going to agree with us, but don't reject it when you don't know what you're talking about. And most doctors, sadly, don't know what they're talking about. Yet they say these things, and patients, will go into the surgery and say, "Oh, my doctor doesn't think this is any good." And actually, he doesn't know it's no good. And so the patients then believe the doctors and say, "Oh, you're wrong. This is no good. I can't have it. My doctor says so." And that's not. So I think what we need is a little bit of a revolution. To make patients. Not all doctors are right all the time.
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, that is spot on. That is spot on. We're not going around saying every single GP needs to prescribe it, but definitely don't deter people who would like this prescription or who would need this prescription. And I suppose the very last question, then, just to sort of like round things off, then would be, what would your advice be to the industry moving forward?
That's a big question. I've got plenty of advice for doctor groups and the government, but for the industry itself, I think there's several things. First, work together. There's lots of different opinions in this space. That's why I started the Cannabis Industry Council, because I wanted to get everyone under the same roof, into a big tent, if you like. So I know in that sort of setting, there's going to be people who disagree with this person about this is the way to do it, that's not the way to do it. Sometimes some fundamental differences, but actually, all they people want is to get cannabis available to those that need it. And you can come at that question from several different ways. So work together, fight commercially if you like. When there's got a population, when there's 1 million people prescribed in this country, then you want to fight over the commercial rights of this, that, or the other. Do it like any other industry, but not now. There's not enough people. Just join together as best you can, swallow your pride, swallow your arrogance, swallow your differences, and get on and promote this sector. And also, I think the other thing is listen to patients. In this sector, more than most other medical sectors, it's the patient often will know a lot more about the subject than the doctor does. And we need to listen, learn, not be a little less arrogant, and listen and learn from the people who've experienced their condition and their medicine, and say, no, you can't have that. You need this. Well, actually, they've tried that, and they've tried this, and this helps, and this is what you need to do. I know the doctor's got to take ultimate responsibility. They can't just do what the patient tells them to do, but you need to listen to patients, involve patients in the businesses, and work together. Will be my two main threads, I think.
And honestly, that is just brilliantly spoken. So I think that's an amazing point to end it on. I like to leave people with something to think about. Thank you so much for coming here today. I've had an amazing discussion with you.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure. I'm glad we made it in the end with all the technical things. I hope we can get over those.
I know, I don't know what is. Yeah, I don't know what is going on. Yeah, but thank you so much. And for anybody that is interested in any of the work that Professor Mike Barnes is doing, all of the links will be in the description section of this video. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.